Okay, so come on in here and I'm gonna show you the parts and I will give you some specs, but I don't want you to worry about copying this exact, okay? Your fishing matters more than your gear. What we're setting up is we're setting up a Scientific Anglers Competition Series nymph line. Now, this line I find to fish a little bit better than the other lines on the market. It's very thin and it's also pretty stiff, giving you a lot of direct connectivity. You can see it has a little bit of memory in there. I can stretch that out. And then this line, hopefully, if it's traveling partway down to my fly, maintains that nice direct tension, okay? So we're gonna set that line up. Now, the downside of this line, it doesn't come with any welded loops, but that's okay. I'm gonna put together a leader system using 15-pound Maxima, doing an Albright knot to this, and I'm gonna put 3 feet of 15-pound Maxima on there, or 4 feet of 15-pound Maxima, 3, 4, doesn't matter that much, 3 feet of this, and 5 feet of fluorocarbon tippet, and I'm gonna connect it with a tippet ring. The first step is I'm gonna tie an Albright knot right here with this Maxima, and then I'm gonna use some Loon UV knot sense to finish that knot off. Okay, so I'm gonna spare you the painful details of the Albright knot and just tell you there are a lot better videos than this one to get instruction on that, because I'm gonna be hiding most of this knot behind my fat thumbs. But the Albright knot to me is a little bit superior than, say, a nail knot. And you're gonna end up struggling when you learn this knot. There's gonna be some ugly ones that come out, and that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and tidy that thing up, and I'm gonna pull it tight, get the coils lined up, and let's just take one little look at that before I trim it. And you can see that on video, and that is not an ugly one. That's a solid 9.5 out of 10 right there. Okay, so that's the Albright knot. I'm gonna clip it and then I'll show you the knot sense trick. Okay, so there's the Albright knot, and as you can see, that thing is tiny. All right, so that's the thing, is we want to keep as much junk off of this connection. So I don't really care for the loop-to-loop connections. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a tiny little bit of this goo, okay? Just a little bit. I don't need a lot. And what I'm trying to do is not only secure the knot, but I'm gonna make this thing smooth, so in the event I need to bring that through my guides, it'll come through my guides just like butter, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and smooth that out. And what I'm gonna do is it's gonna create a very slick surface. I'm gonna put a little bit more goo on there, like that right there. And you can shape it with your fingers. That's the nice thing about this, because that glue doesn't dry until I do one of two things. Either one, I take it out in the sun, or I just use this UV light right here inside Red's Fly Shop, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and just cure that knot with this UV light. And you can treat that knot again in the event it's a little bit sticky going through your eyelets. Now, this knot should not go through your eyelets very often unless you're using a long tippet and you're landing a fish. Okay, so that's my Albright knot and my connection there. All right, so I've got my Albright knot connected, and what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna measure off approximately 4 feet here. This does not need to be exact. I'm gonna go ahead and give that a stretch just to straighten it, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut that 15-pound Maxima off right there. All right, so now I've just got one piece coming down. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take 1X Rio indicator material, and I'm gonna take about 3 feet of this. Again, it's not exact. I'm just gonna go ahead and pull about 4 feet off there and cut it. Now, the knot I like right here is gonna be a junction knot. And you can do this one of two ways. I can use a nail knot tool, which is really handy, and that's the one I'm gonna do right here because I'm in the shop. Now, if I were standing waist deep in the river and I needed to rebuild this leader, I probably would use a double uni knot. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tie a double nail because it's really pretty and it lines up great. So I'm gonna go ahead and tie a nail knot using the Maxima over the cider material. I'm gonna wet that and make sure it cinches up nice. And then what I'll do is I'll spin this around. And the 1X indicator material remains pretty visible when as far as using a light mono is concerned. In low light conditions, it's really common for anglers to want to use a piece of really bright chartreuse colored backing. Seems to be a little easier to see. The 1X of the Rio indicator material is pretty visible though. Okay, so I'm gonna do another nail knot. Again, if you need to learn how to do a nail knot, there are better videos for that. I'm just showing you how to do this double nail. Now here's where the magic happens. These two knots are gonna slide down into one another. Now you don't need to gorilla test that. Just cinch them up nice and neat. You don't need to yank it super hard. Keeping in mind, it's more important for this knot to be clean and straight than it is to be incredibly strong, as the terminal tippet is generally gonna be at most 3x, okay? So I'm gonna trim that down, and I'll show you the connection that I've made here. And some people will even put a little bit of knot sense type material right there to smooth that connection out. But now I've got my cider material starting here, and what I'm gonna do in the cider material is I'm gonna tie a couple of whiskers or antennas in here that help me read my drift and see it a little bit better in mixed light. And the knot I'm gonna do there, in fact, we'll just do it live on video, real time. I generally will just do triple surgeons right here. You can do double unis in this 1X, but a triple surgeon has plenty of strength. And I'm gonna show you a little trick here. So I'm gonna do this one fast just to keep the video as short as I can. So I did a triple surgeons, and I have these two tags coming off. Now that one will probably hang out. It's gonna be the top tag that hangs out close to 90 degrees here. And that tag is probably a little bit long. It would get caught in the wind a little bit more. So I can shorten it by about 1 inch. But what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna tie a half hitch around the upper part of the line right here. And it's just gonna be a half inch that I don't need to yank down too tight, but that's gonna help that sit out a little bit closer to 90 degrees. And that's gonna be the first of 3 of these little antennas or feelers that comes out the side, okay? So I'm gonna do one more, and then I'll tie on the tippet ring, and we'll pick the video back up when I tie the tippet ring on the end. Okay, so what I've done here is I made my junction with a double nail knot here. I've got my cider material coming down here, and I've got one of these antennas coming off like that. That's the longest one. One thing I see when people build their own leaders is they leave these really short. You can always cut this down, but you can't make it longer. So when I tie them up, I leave them as long as I care to fish them. And that makes them a little bit easier to see in mixed light, especially if I like to have multiple of these, because if one is rotated directly away from me, it's harder to see. But when I'm in light where there's mixed sun and shade, these make it a lot easier to pick up my drift and see behavior in my drift. Now I'm coming down to the end here, and I like to keep my marks relatively close to the end of my cider. What I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna add a tippet ring, and I realize it's gonna be a little bit hard to see, but the tip I wanna give you is tie that tippet ring on while it's still on the swivel that it comes with, okay? It's a little awkward trying to do it on video here, and I generally will leave my tippet rings in the package as well, like that right there, and they just seem to store better. That little swivel gets lost. So I do just a regular clinch knot that's about 7 to 8 turns, and I just make sure to cinch it up nice and neat. The 1X is 11-pound test, and so don't worry, you want clean knots, but don't worry too much about your knot strength, because this is all much stronger than your terminal tippet's gonna be. So then I'm gonna take the tippet ring off of the swivel, I'll put it back in there, and I'll store this back in with my tapered leaders, and I'll just put that whole package in there. So now what I've got is I've left this tag. Now this tag here is gonna be the very end of my cider, and I like to have a marker at the end of my cider. And most often I'll be fishing with this marker relatively close to the water surface. If the water surface is this glass case right here, that terminal end needs to be marked with a short tag so that I can easily see how much suspension or how much I'm holding that cider out of the water right there. So for the last step, what I'm gonna do is my most common tippet that I'm gonna use is gonna be 5X. I'm gonna take this Scientific Anglers 5X fluorocarbon, and I'm gonna take off, and I'll just measure with my arms. And if I take about 7 feet off, I can wind up with about 5 feet of usable tippet to my anchor fly. And I'm just gonna take this 5X, thread it on that small tippet ring. The smaller is better for this situation. And I'm just gonna tie on a clinch knot here. I don't do the improved clinch knot. I think it kind of muddies up the knot's ability to close. I know that there's some debate on that, but that's the way I do it. it's fast and efficient, and I can make repairs quickly. So there I go. I've got my terminal end of the tippet, okay? All right, so what I've got now is a nearly complete leader. I've got the end of my fly line right here, all right knot, and I've got about 4 feet of 15-pound Maxima tippet, and then I've got about 3 feet of 1X indicator material tied with those little whiskers in there so I can see them. A more technical leader might transition to a lighter tippet right here, but we want to make sure you can see it, so that 1X is a good idea. I've got my small tippet ring here with my little tag at the end, and then I've got about probably 7 feet of this tippet. Most of my leaders I set up, I start with about 5X of tippet down to my anchor fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out, and I'm going to measure out about just under 6 feet to there, and by the time I tie these knots on the end, I'm going to have about 5. So what I've done here is I'm folding this 5X over, and I've taught this a couple of different ways. And the strongest way to do it is actually in contrary to one of the little video clips I've done about a tip being fast, you want to tie this next junction. I'm going to overlay these lines here, and I'm going to go back up about 18 inches, okay? And I'm going to take, I've got both strands of that 5X in my hand, and I'm actually going to do a quadruple surgeon's knot. 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Grab all 4 pieces, wet the knot, pull it shut, just like that. And I'm not going to go through the process of tying the flies on, but I am going to talk you through this junction here. So the longer one of these, I made sure to leave the one that is the contiguous line a little bit longer. That's where I will typically tie on my heavier fly or my anchor fly. And up here, I'm going to take this shorter tag that joins in right here. And I'm setting this one up for a customer. I'm going to go ahead and leave it like it is, but typically I'll tie my anchor fly here, and then I'll tie on my point fly or my tag fly, whatever you want to call that guy. I'll just tie that off about 8 to 10 inches off of this junction right here. And my total leader length is about 12 feet, which I find to be ideal for rods anywhere from 10 to 11 feet. I think that is the right leader length. If you get much longer than 12 feet, you tend to wind up with the end of that competition fly line sliding in and out of your guides. And I tend to find anglers find the most success. There's lots of ways to make longer leaders, but it just seems like with these lines, they find the most success when they've got some overhang of that Euro nymphing line out the rod tip. It casts better, it drifts better, and we don't get distracted by having any knots running through the eyelets of that rod. So that's how I set up the Scientific Angler's Mastery Competition Series line, and that is my custom leader build right here at Red's.